This is the Dallas Morning News.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into SportsDay Insider presented by the Dallas Morning News. I am Kevin Sherrington, joined by my pals Grant and Joe Hoyt. And so we're here as we're taping this on Tuesday morning. Jerry Jones has just done his radio show, and it's part of the job to listen to those things and see what Jerry's going to say next. And in this edition, he did have something to say about his defensive coordinator, Matt Eberflus. So, Joe, kind of fill us in on how that went.
Yeah, I think one of the prevailing ideas in regards to Matt Eberflus and his status with the Cowboys has been for a while that there's no way they would make a change after 1 year. That, Jerry and Steven both have been pretty consistent saying, hey, continuity is huge. Matt Eberflus is the third defensive coordinator they've had in 3 years. So I think everyone's been kind of thinking, as bad as it's been, there's no way that could be fatal for Matt Eberflus's tenure with the Cowboys. I think today was the first time that a seed of doubt has been put in there. Jerry Jones was adamantly, I think, putting pressure on Matt Eberflus in a multitude of different ways. I think realistically, when they were talking about the team and the situation where they're at, being 6-7-1, he used the word often surprised at where they've been defensively. He pointed to the linebackers and their lack of communication as something that's been a big issue. He said injuries have definitely played a part, and communication is essential in the scheme. But right now, this is the healthiest they've been. And I think kind of the biggest takeaway in terms of potential pressure on Matt Eberflus is he was talking about J.J. McCarthy, who has had an up and down first season with the Minnesota Vikings. And he was kind of giving him credit, saying that, he has played well. He played well against the Cowboys. And then he kind of stopped for a second. He said, well, I feel like we're saying that a lot recently with quarterbacks that haven't been playing well, that all of a sudden play well against us. So for the first time, I think there's pressure on Matt Eberflus in the idea that he might not be back after these next 3 games. I think these next 3 games are critical for his potential to come back for the Cowboys.
I bought into the thing that they talked about earlier about, well, do you really want to change your coordinators again? Because that's just a recipe for disaster, right? You keep changing coordinators all the time. But on the other hand, if you're kind of rebuilding this defense anyway, right? I mean, you just brought in the 2 defensive tackles who should be mainstays of the defense for a while. I don't see a lot of other keepers on here except for, in the secondary, Shawn Ravel has done a good job. Looks like a keeper at cornerback. Obviously Marvin Overshown at linebacker. But I could see a lot of changing out here if you feel that Eberflus is the problem here. And then, of course, we've talked about that ad nauseum this year, his zone defense and his kind of resistance to incorporating much man-to-man, which seems to fit some of the personnel better that he has, then maybe this isn't such a bad idea if they're going to change him.
Yeah, one thing that Jerry Jones was asked specifically is, do you think that you have the players to fit Matt Eberflus's scheme? And he quickly brought up the old adage that coaches have to make players, they have to adapt to players, right? That's what the good coaches do. He then said, though, he does believe that the players in this scheme fit Matt Eberflus's system. I have questions about that personally. I think when you have corners like they do, that they should be running a lot more man coverage. We've talked about that. Clearly, the communication issues in the secondary. I don't know if that's something that is scheme based, but those have been bad. And I think if you have communication issues, you have to simplify things. Long story short, if the players are fit for this scheme and it's playing like this, then there might be something wrong with the scheme ultimately. And I think there's no way to look at this first year as anything other than a major failure for the Cowboys defense. And I think it's about believing moving forward. If you think that Matt Eberflus, with more talent potentially through the draft or free agency, could take better strides next season, and I think that's in doubt.
Yeah, we're going to get to the draft here in a little bit because that's Joe's a draft nerd and so am I. To me, building rosters is some of the most fun thing about being around sports. Sometimes for me, more if you grew up in Houston with as many bad sports teams as they had, it was all the fun was trying to build a roster in the offseason because the seasons themselves were all terrible. But anyway, I really think here, looking at this team, and first of all, let's go back to what Jerry talked about with the quarterback and about what happened on Sunday against the Vikings with JJ. So yeah, it has been an issue this year, and of course we talked about before. When you trade a pass rusher like Micah Parsons and what he's able to do against the defense or against an offense, and what he brings, and then the feeling is a little bit about, well, now with these two defensive tackles, you're really getting that interior pressure, and so this is a completely different dynamic. But the fact is that McCarthy was not really threatened on Sunday. Joe, could you how many sacks did the Cowboys have in that game?
I can't even off the top of my head because it was so little pressure. And I think that's been another indictment this week, in the last 2 weeks, frankly, about Matt Eberflus. If you go look at what they did early on in both those games, they brought pressure. They brought 5-man, 6-man pressures. You saw it in the opening drive against the Minnesota Vikings when Donovan Wilson tipped a pass on a blitz and resulted in an interception for Quinnen Williams. They blitzed, I believe, in the first two drives 60% of the time. The rest of the game, 13% of the time. And one thing Brian Schottenheimer was asking or said in terms of that yesterday was, they want to get pressure with four guys. And if you're not getting pressure with four guys, you have to adjust. Clearly, there was not an adjustment based on that last game. And I think that's something, if you're Matt Eberflus over the next 3 games, I would recommend, and I know it's easier said than done, I would recommend dialing up pressure because, simply put, good things happen when that happens.
Yeah, you don't have the personnel to get that pass rush. Look, these guys, the defensive tackles are terrific. I'm not questioning that at all. But you're not getting any pressure from your ends. You're not getting it. They're not getting to the quarterback. Just simple as that. So yeah, if you're not doing that, then you're going to have to create it some other way. And I don't know any other way to do it than by blitzing. It's as simple as that. If you get any quarterback in the NFL, I don't care who it is, you give them enough time to throw the ball, they're going to complete passes. It's just as simple as that. And that's the problem here with the Micah Parsons things, who, by the way, we should bring up, obviously suffered an ACL injury. He'll be out for the rest of the year. And I don't know, Joe, does that mean that Micah probably wouldn't even be ready for training camp?
That's going to be tough to make it back in time for that. Yeah, same thing with Mahomes too. When you think about that, it'll be interesting to see when those two can get back to full form next season.
Yeah, and then who knows what they're like after that. I mean, Micah's built on power and speed. He's a rare animal, so it'll be interesting to see how he performs after that. But at any rate, this is a real conundrum for the Cowboys. That was a fairly pitiful performance by the defense. And the offense didn't play great either. The offense had its issues as well. George Pickens, 3 catches, 6 targets. I didn't see the body language wasn't nearly as bad as it was against the Lions, but it wasn't great either. And one of the things that Dak Prescott said after that Detroit game was that he looked in, George's eyes and didn't see it. And so that's when he decided, I got to go with CD here. I'm wondering if the reason there were only 6 targets was that Dak looked in George's eyes and he didn't see it against the Vikings either.
I also think, to be honest, and I'm curious kind of what you guys think about this too, I think a lot of that was scheme versus the Vikings, because ultimately I think when you – and I think this is another further indictment on Matt Eberflus, frankly, is when you watch what Brian Flores did and the fact that Brian Schottenheimer wasn't able to sleep probably after that game because of what Brian Flores did to him and Dak Prescott. It was hard to read anything against 8 guys lining up on the ball and not knowing who's coming. And I think you had Harrison Smith, who was just confusing them the entire time. So to be honest with you, when I was looking back at that game, was it another, not great George Pickens performance? Sure. Right. But I do think a lot of that is the scheme that they ran in Minnesota, kind of putting them in tough positions to kind of get George Pickens downfield. I think I would have recommended a couple more shots to him just to push the ball downfield, especially against that blitz and that pressure. But also easier said than done when you've got guys you don't even know are coming off the edge and making plays.
Yeah. So let's segue now into offseason here, because they got a 1% chance of making the playoffs. Frankly, I don't know why you'd want to make the playoffs at this point. If you can't get the defense to play any better than this, it'd just be an embarrassment to get in against a really good team. Vikings aren't a good team, and they piled up points against you. So that's embarrassing enough. So we've talked about the George Pickens thing, about, what do you do about him? Do you give him that contract or not? over these next 3 games, I think this should be a proving ground for George right here to see what happens. Because if he's still hasn't grown any from what he was in Pittsburgh, if that first 6 or 7 games or 8 games, 9 games, 10 games, whatever, was just kind of George at his best, and now we're seeing George at his worst. Uh, what do they decide to do here? That's going to be a real decision for the Cowboys. Number one, and then of course number two is if the draft were tomorrow, the Cowboys would be picking 14th and 23rd. The 23rd being the Packers pick that they got for Micah Parsons. So in that scenario, in that draft scenario, Joe, you're a draft nerd. What do you think they need the most? And B, what would you do with the 14th and 23rd picks?
Yeah, let's touch on George Pickens though really quick. I still don't see a scenario where he's not on this team next season. I think whether it's franchise tag or extension, I think Brian Schottenheimer, even in these last 2 games, I think there's still an argument for George Pickens based on how other receivers have done. I think they look at the fact of having multiple talented guys as a boon for them and something they want to have moving forward. In the draft, I think it's interesting because you touched on it earlier, Kevin, and I'm sure, Evan, you kind of share the same feelings. How many of these guys on defense are coming back next season, right? They don't have – I think defensively you're looking for foundational building blocks, and I don't think there's many. I think DeMarvin Overshown will be back. I think Savone Rev will be back. I do think that they bring back all 3 defensive tackles in Quentin Williams, Osa Odighizu, and Kenny Clark, who are all under contract. I think with Kenny, there's a potential that you maybe move off that if you want to save money, but I think that they're fine. There's not a lot of guys back, so they have a lot of needs. I think probably the biggest question mark that's emerged for them from a draft and free agent perspective is the offensive tackle position. I think that there might have been a secret hope that Nate Thomas could develop into a guy that maybe they put at left tackle. They kick Tyler Guyton out to right tackle, maybe a little more familiar for him, and they can move forward with that after they let go of Terrence Steele for financial purposes, which is not a guarantee that happens, but feels like it's a likelihood. So I think offensive tackle has kind of created a little bit of a stronger need. And where do you get offensive tackles? You have to get them in the first round. So, I think a guy like Spencer Fano from Utah, there's an offensive tackle, I forget his name, from Miami. That's fantastic. If one of those guys are there at 14, maybe that makes you kind of get off the defensive plan. Ultimately, though, I think they need foundational defensive pieces. And if I'm the Cowboys, my number one target is Caleb Downs, the safety from Ohio State. I think that they need guys that are not only difference makers, but someone who can excel in communication. I think if you talk to Cowboys players, they gave all the credit in the world to Harrison Smith in year 14 for that defensive performance for Brian Flores. And part of the reason is because of his communication skills and his ability to kind of make disguises work. I think Caleb Downs is that type of guy. People will say positional value. Is safety really a good fit at 14? I say I don't care. I think that that's someone that could be a safety and a foundational building block for the Cowboys defense for the next decade. And then I think pass rusher is the other one too. If a guy like Ruben Bain is there or a guy like David Bailey from Texas Tech, those are guys where you start to think that you could add some juice opposite of Donovan Ezeraku moving forward for their edge rushing.
All right, Evan, let's go with our CBS mock draft that you looked up in our pre-show.
Well, I've just looked at 2 quick mock drafts, CBS and Tankathon, which also does the odds on the playoff chances and also ranks the lottery. And I mean, they've both got Caleb Downs going in the top 10. They've got Cincinnati picking him at 9, and I believe Tankathon has the Jets picking him at 5. So that's, I mean, he's obviously going to be somebody the Cowboys would have to trade up to get based on these early projections.
5 is high for a safety. That's happened before. The Cowboys took a safety at 5 one time, and Roy Williams. But to me, 14 is not high for a safety. Not if he's good enough. Not if you believe in him. And over the years, the Cowboys have struggled. I would say, in this century, the Cowboys have struggled finding a good safety more than any other position on defense. It seemed like to me, because of their refusal to draft them for one thing, and or at least use a fairly high pick on them. And I think a good safety is a difference maker, and this organization really needs that, I believe. So I'm not sure that with as many needs as the Cowboys have, that I would want to be trading up though. I got to tell you, 2 picks in the first round seems like something this this organization really needs. I agree with Joe about the offensive tackle. That's not been good. Tyler Guyton has not been great at left tackle, and Terrence Steele has not been good at right tackle. And Terrence Steele, you're paying him a lot of money. I think he's making 17 million, somewhere around there. If you could move Guyton back over to right tackle, which is what he played at Oklahoma, and if you could bring in a left tackle that you think could start right away, then I think that's probably a good idea. And I do believe in drafting a safety, and I wouldn't mind seeing them draft a linebacker for that matter. That's not been a good group either. DeMarvion Overshown has a lot of speed and he's really good, but they need a little more juice at that position, in my estimation. And one
Well, I
last
mean,
thing,
CBS has the Cowboys at 14 if they were to stay at 14, taking a linebacker from Ohio State, Sonny Styles. And then they've got at 22, they've got the Texans right ahead of the Cowboys, taking C.J. Allen from Georgia. They've got the Cowboys taking Mansour Delane, a cornerback from LSU. Uh, so I think there are going to be linebackers. If the Cowboys keep their 2 picks, I think there will be a linebacker in the mix at one of those for them. But if you're going to get a defensive back, there are few and far between defensive backs in this first round projection. And if Caleb Downs, it sounds like Caleb Downs, especially from what Joe is saying, is head and shoulders above the corners that are available. So if that's the
those Ohio
case,
State guys they play out pretty well.
if that's the case, you're going to have to move up significantly to get them. You're going to have to move into the top 10.
Well, there's multiple things the Cowboys can do at this point, right? And Jerry has talked about how he can turn these things into, he can turn the Micah Parsons trade into 5 players, right? I think that's what he said at one time. So far, what are we up to now on the player count with the Micah Parsons trade?
I'd say you got 2. I mean, you got. So I mean, obviously there's some other factors involved, but you got Kenny Clark and Quinnen Williams.
Yeah.
But I think one option that's going to be on the table too is trading back with that 23rd pick, maybe multiple times to get even more picks. I would not be shocked to see the Cowboys do that. I think it'll be balancing how deep this draft is. I think that there's potential that you could get multiple second round picks that pan out in this draft. That's kind of my early read on this look, especially if you look at some of the positions they need. I think you could find a linebacker in the second round. A guy like Sonny Styles I don't think would be there, but maybe someone else kind of slips back and is available in that second round. They have a lot of needs, and this is kind of an indictment a little bit on their lack of drafting success recently, because I feel like they've had a lot of needs the last 3 years. And I think some of these needs have repeated themselves. I mean, realistically, what do you do with Javonte Williams? This is a guy that you liked at his price range. That price range is inevitably going to go up now. I don't believe in taking Jeremiah Love if he's there, but we'll see.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And look, we've given Will McClay lots of credit and well deserved over the last, I don't know, 13, 14 years, however long he's been in charge. The draft record is much better than it was before he came aboard. So that's commendable. But you're right, it hasn't gone as well the last few years. For a while there, anytime they drafted an offensive lineman in the first round, it was golden. They were drafting all pros. They're drafting guys who might be on their way to the Hall of Fame. Tyler Smith has certainly been that, but Tyler Guyton has not. And Terrence Steele, who was not obviously a high draft pick, and he has not panned out since his injury and hasn't been the same kind of player. I've always said that I thought that Terrence Steele is probably better fit for guard. He's such a good run blocker than he is for tackle. But I guess they feel like at the money he's making, it's not worth paying it to play guard. So there are a lot of decisions that the Cowboys are going to have to make here, and I'm not sure when it's going to ever happen at this point. Certainly not this year. Joe, we got to get out. We appreciate you taking the time sitting down with us, and we will talk some more. And maybe, we're going to have a discussion about whether we're having a podcast next week, Christmas week, because I don't know. We got a lot of stuff going on, but we might. But anyway,
it was good though. However, finally determining a direction for the Cowboys in 2025 in Week 15. And we know that direction is 2026. So
yeah.
I'm glad we finally settled that. And we'll figure out whether or not we're actually going to have a podcast next week.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Joe.
Sounds good.
See ya. All right. So the Rangers made a little noise here, not at the winter meetings, but after the winter meetings, and they got some guys here. So Evan, fill us in on the additions.
Well, they addressed their needs by signing Danny Jansen, the catcher, to a 2-year deal and getting deals done with a pair of relievers. None of the deals, Kevin, are going to make waves. The Rangers just aren't in that position. But I do think what the Rangers have done here in the wake of everything, when you put all the pieces together this winter and you know what the limitations were in terms of finances, I think they've done a productive job of addressing their primary needs. And in that regard, I think it comes down to the offense, right? And getting guys on base. And, you look at Brandon Nimmo, you look at Danny Jansen, and you look at Josh Smith, all subbing in for Garcia, Simeon, and Jonah Heim. And you're talking about, if those three guys perform at their 2025 levels versus what the three guys who were with the Rangers were last year, you're talking about a composite 325, 327 on base percentage versus a 287 on base percentage. That's about 80 more times on base, and that can make a big difference in a number of close games. So I think on that level, the Rangers have done a fine job. I think the bullpen is still going to be a challenge. But here is where I will point out one financial element, and that is this. The Rangers saved $11 million in the short term with the Simeon deal. And so they got Brandon Nimmo. And then with these three deals for 2026, they've used up that $11 million. So they've not spent a net dollar on free agency yet and have gotten an outfielder, a catcher, and two relievers. Now the question is going to be, how much more money is Ray Davis willing to add to this roster? I mean, if you add another $25 million on top of what you've got and push this team over, say, 200 to 205 or 210, I think you've got the ability to do some more work in the bullpen and add a depth starter.
I get all that, and I think this is probably as good as they could have done given the circumstances, and maybe Ray Davis was waiting to see if if his president would do that. I hope that wasn't the case, but anyway, it does seem to be a healthy start. And we'll see if these guys can do that, because that was the thing. Looking at last year, you look at teams in the playoffs, and you see, how come everybody else has a lineup full of guys with an OPS over 700? And the Rangers had what, 2 guys over 700 last year?
I think 3. They had Seager, they had Langford, and they had Smith.
Yeah. So 3 guys. That's just ridiculous to have a lineup that was that poor. And so I guess my question will be, if these guys don't, come in and at least do that, then they need to investigate what's going on at the ballpark.
They are investigating that. I mean, that is an issue, but I do think that, look, the Rangers had some guys last year that were just really bad at reaching base and weren't willing to take walks. And 2 of them were also Josh Young and Jake Berger. And there's, I think, significant, I don't want to say pressure, but there's need for those guys to step up and be more selective in 2026. I do think that Berger, reuniting with Skip Schumacher and kind of the core of what was that Marlins staff in 23 and 24, I think that there is ability there for Jake to take a step forward I think for Josh Young, there's going to have to be kind of he's at a career fork in the road. He cannot be as indiscriminate a swinger as he has been and continue to be considered an everyday player.
Yeah, I'm mystified by Josh Young. I got to tell you, and more than anything, I'm mystified by what appears to be the attitude about it, and being so stubborn. And you're sitting down, you're benched, and you just still doing the same thing. It's either out of frustration or just obstinate. So one of the two.
Yeah,
I do what. Go ahead.
Kevin, my feeling on that, and I've said this a couple times on the podcast, is I think over 30 years being around professional baseball players and just 40 years or so in general about being around sports, one thing you learn about great athletes is that they're stubborn, right? And that their stubbornness is often an asset. And it's often an asset until it becomes a detriment. And they either have to make a self-realization or their career window of opportunity really shrinks. And that's where I think Josh is right now. He's got to have some better self-awareness.
Well, speaking of which, and I think we should mention this because I was a little surprised that Adolis Garcia will be the new right fielder for the Philadelphia Phillies. I mean, what an upgrade for his career.
Well, I think that part plays well for him. I think the Phillies feel like with the room that they have with Kyle Schwarber, and I think they're probably going to end up re-signing JT Realmuto and the veterans that they have in that room, they don't put up with a lot of mood swings or moodiness, and I think that they will be a good check for. Adolis can get a little bit moody. He can get sullen when he's not going well, and he can he can put a lot of pressure on himself, and I think that group will be really good for him. They have the kind of presence in that clubhouse that I think the Rangers lack. And then you just get into the fact that the Citizens Bank ballpark is a hitter's haven. I think that'll be really good for him. And if Adolis gets off to a good start there, Philly fans are absolute maniacs, and they will love him. And you know how Adolis thrives on adrenaline and emotion, and that will really push him. On the other hand, if it goes bad, it's going to be really bad. But the Phillies feel like, look, they had a right fielder who underachieved in Nick Castellanos. They're paying him $20 million for next year. They have already made the decision that they're moving on from Nick Castellanos, and they feel like Adolis is a better candidate to bounce back than Castellanos is.
Yeah, and I'd say, and I think everything you said is right. But if Adolis goes there and plays well,
hang on, Kevin. Hang on 1 minute.
Bad. Yeah.
Just hang on. You said everything you think. I think everything you said is right. Let's face facts. Everything I do say is right.
No, Evan, come on. Let's be real. But seriously, if Adolis goes there and plays really well, then that's just another indictment of the Rangers and what they're doing, or and because I get what you're saying, because
I think it's an indictment certainly of the clubhouse culture of the past clubhouse culture for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something. Look, Lord knows what it is. What in the world went wrong with this team? And we've guessed at it, and we've said career years, and we said all these kind of things. But at some point, I'd like to know there was something tangible that we can say is that, yeah, this was the problem with this club. And right. So maybe we'll find out now because, they felt like that was part of the reason for trading Marcus Semien, not only the non-production, but just felt like he's a little bit of a grind in the clubhouse, and so if that's the issue, if that was the issue all along, well, then okay, then they fix that. And I'm not saying that we're in no way, shape, or form saying that Marcus Semien is a bad guy. He's a good guy. He's been a great player. He's just a little bit of a grind. He's not. I don't think that he was bad for people, but it wasn't certainly good for people.
Again, I think that there were a certain set of dynamics in the Rangers clubhouse that exacerbated what should be some minor issues. And in particular, it's that the two guys that they signed as pillars for the future of the team, Marcus Semien and Corey Seager, go about their work in completely different ways. And I think that neither one of them was quite aware of the impact it had inside the clubhouse of basically like, well, if I do it this way, I'm disappointing Marcus. If I do it this way, am I kind of disrespecting Corey and Corey's presence. So I think that added to it. And I do think, look, Marcus can be a little bit moody as well. And I think that was also exacerbated by the fact that, Adolis was not the guy who had the most emotion on this team was Adolis, but he was not often at his locker pre or post game. The guy who was supposed to be the face of the franchise, Corey Seager, was not often at his locker pre or post game. And so among the position players, it kind of fell to Marcus to be team spokesperson. And I think that, that can wear on a guy. And I think that it can make a guy defensive. And I think that's the case with Marcus. And so I guess what I'm saying here is like, you got the worst out of all of these situations with the best intentions. Everything the Rangers tried to do all made sense, but after 4 years, it just was clear it wasn't working.
No, not working. It was time to move on, and all the best to those. I hope he does have a great year. He was a very likable guy, and everything you said about him is true. He was. I love the whole dynamic between him and Corey Seager. That was to me one of the most heartwarming stories in all of this, and on their run to the World Series title was when Corey just opened up at the All-Star game and said, "Hey, this guy, I love this guy. I can't be this guy, but I love this guy. I love what he brings, and that was so great that happened, and that he would even say that. In the conversation I've had with Corey Seager, which are very few, and and you of course know exactly what he's like. He doesn't open up about anything, and to open up about that and to say that was really something. So. I'll be watching to see how Adolis does.
Yeah, I will just say this, and let's move on from Adolis. But I think when I saw that news yesterday, and as much as I thought Adolis had really kind of been on the downside, I did say, wow, for $10 million, this is a good bet for a bounce back. This is the perfect situation for him to potentially bounce back.
And my guy Dave Dombrowski.
My guy.
My guy Dave Dombrowski. That's he's kind of my Howie Roseman of MLB.
Hey, listen, I've known David for over 30 years. I covered him for a couple of years. It was a great learning experience, and he is going to go down as one of the all-time great baseball executives. And he and Howie both have the same deal, right? We're going to win. That's what matters. We're going to win. We're going to find a way to win, and forget about building for the future or this or that. We are going to win. And I think David realized that after he got to Detroit. Is in Florida, he was all about building a winner. And when they finally just went into the free agent market, and it ended up tanking Wayne Huizinga's ownership, but they went into the free agent market, they won a World Series. And I think when he got to Detroit after that, it was, we're going all out every year. We're not worrying about stacking up prospects.
He interviewed for the job here.
He could have had the job here, but he wasn't willing to take on all of the I don't know what the right word, the codicils or the additions that Tom Hicks wanted him to hold on to. Tom wanted the new general manager to hold on to Jerry Naron for a year at least, and he also wanted the new general manager to hold on to Grady Fuson for a year at least. And those things ended up not being long-term fixes for the Rangers. And David ended up going to Detroit and took the Tigers to 2 World Series appearances, and gone to Boston, won a World Series, gone to Philadelphia, been to the World Series. He's
pretty
an
good.
all-timer. Yeah,
he's pretty good. I love him. All right, we're going to move on now. We're going to talk about a little bit about the colleges before we get out of here. So we got that. I'll be in College Station this week with Leah Simakopoulos. We're going to be down there covering the Aggies against Miami. You'd like to think that the Aggies would win that game, but I got to tell you, after their performance against Texas right after Thanksgiving, it's no longer a given. Then the Hurricanes were just all over the map, which is, I guess, is a funny way to put that. It also has to do with how the quarterback plays. If he's going to self-destruct, if he plays the top of his game, as you well know, Carson Beck is a very good quarterback. he has a tendency to make a throw every once in a while that just makes you shake your head. He's kind of to me, the Vinny Testaverde of this generation. Not as good as Vinny was, but could be as bad as Vinny was at times. We'll see on that game. You got any feelings about Miami and A&M?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been a little bit biased on Carson Beck over the last year because I just don't think he ended up being a great teammate at Georgia, and I figured he was going to make a mistake if that SMU game was close, and he did. So I do think that playing at College Station and with a quarterback who can make mistakes in big games by trying to do too much, I think A&M should win that game. The thing for me, Kevin, again, is like, we are talking about the playoffs, but both those teams have been off basically for 3 weeks, and you just don't know how they're going to come out after 3 weeks off. I would take Texas A&M. I think they're a little bit better than Miami is. I think Miami's not terribly disciplined. That seems to show up every time I watch Miami. There's too many careless mistakes and penalties and lack of execution in a playoff game. That'll kill you.
Yeah, no question about that. So what do you got with Alabama and Oklahoma?
I want to say Oklahoma wins because I just haven't been impressed with Alabama lately. But it's going to be hard for a team. It's hard for a team to sweep a club in a season, right? Oklahoma won the game earlier this year in the second half of the season. Alabama has, in Ryan Williams and Ty Simpson, Alabama has some great playmakers. Question is whether or not they can be they can be on the same page, and if they can do that, Alabama has the ability to get on a roll.
Yeah, Oklahoma, John Mateer is just too inconsistent for me at quarterback. They're the most imbalanced team, or unbalancing, whatever that is, in the playoffs. I think they have a terrific defense. Their offense is just really lacking. I have a hard time imagining Oklahoma beating Alabama in this game. But that's another one that's pretty much up for grabs. These games are very close, and they're ranked 8 and 9, right? So they should be close, or at least going in, they should look that way.
So we've just talked about the two local teams this week,
Yeah.
and you brought up two things with both those teams: quarterback play and defense, right? And
Yeah.
so if you look at these 12 teams, what team do you feel like has the best balance between quarterback and defense?
Look, let me just say this first of all about Texas Tech. If Baron Morton is playing well, if he's healthy, I think he's certainly good. He's not a great quarterback, but he's a good quarterback. And when he's healthy, that offense really hums. And their defense is playing great. That's no joke. They they have 4 players on that defense that made All-American team, and 3 of them are in the defensive line. 3 players in the defensive line. That's first and second team. But that's a lot for Texas Tech to have that is unbelievable. And so that's what Cody Campbell's money has done out there. So, we saw what they did to BYU, right? What BYU scored 14 points on them in 2 games. So that's a that's a terrific defense, and the quarterback's good enough. So I like Tech because of that. I think that Tech is better than A&M. Frankly, I think not just because of that they're ranked higher in the CFP. I think that they have a better defense overall, and I think they're more consistent offensively than Tech is. than A&M is.
But again, we come back to all this, right? And you look at the situations. Indiana with Mendoza and their defense, Ohio State with Justin Sayin and their defense, Georgia with Gunnar Stockton and their defense and the way they're playing, and Texas Tech. I do think that the one question mark there is Baron Morton gonna be consistent. But those 4 teams certainly seem to have the best combination of quarterback play and defensive play.
Yeah, they do, and if you look at we kind of the Big Ten's really top heavy, and it is, but it doesn't matter if you're really good at the top, that's all that really matters in the end, and they are really good. Ohio State and Indiana are both good. I was blown away by how well Indiana played against Ohio State in that game, which was a terrific game, I wouldn't be surprised at all if that ends up being the championship game as well between those two teams. So we'll see. But yes, you have to get really good play from your quarterback, and that's to me the issue for A&M. Marcel Reed, not great against Texas, and just he's bothered me a little bit all year with his happy feet and the fact that he's throwing his fastball every pitch. Every once in a while you got to lay one in there. So he's got some dynamic players, and I do think they will beat Miami. I think it'll be close, but I think they'll do beat Miami and then move on. So we'll see where it goes from there.
I think the only thing I'm comfortable saying right now is I feel fairly confident that the semifinals will be chalk. It will be 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I think we could have 2 great games and hopefully a great final.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised with that either. Although, I think I was feeling all along that it was just pretty wide open. And then here in the last couple of weeks of the season, it really seemed to firm up here, as you said, the top 4 teams. And I do think the committee got those right. We can make fun of the committee for all the other stuff and the guys at the bottom of their top 12, but the top 4 are correct. All right, that's going to do it for our podcast this week. I tell you what, we'll let the listeners decide. If you want us to have a podcast next week when I'm on vacation and probably Evan's on vacation, then you know
I'm
what?
just going to be trying to manage the menagerie of animals in this house.
Yeah, that's it. You got a cat going on, you got dogs going on. I don't know, hopefully Christian got that out of the podcast. But
there's a cat's butt, just in case you were curious.
That's great. That's a great look. Okay, thanks very much for that. All right, so if this is our last podcast before Christmas, I want to say happy holidays to everybody out there. And Evan, is there anything you'd like to say?
Well, I'd like to add happy Hanukkah to Merry Christmas.
I said happy holidays.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, come on.
That's the best you could do, I guess.
But
we are in the middle of Hanukkah right now. It is Hanukkah. Yeah, and I am, despite these 8 crazy nights, I am here for the podcast.
That's it. What a guy you are.
I need to make you some potato pancakes, Kevin. You need to have some potato pancakes in your life.
Latkes. Yeah.
Latkes.
Yeah, I love those. They're great. Super. All right, that's going to do it. So from everybody in here to everybody out there, thanks, and we'll see you next time, whenever that is.